I'm something of a casual fan of the Justice League of America. I guess I want to like the JLA, much like how I want to like Superman or the Legion of Superheroes. But stories about Superman make it so very easy for me to not want to waste my time. In a similar fashion, every story I've read from after Mark Waid's run on the JLA has left me feeling very lukewarm toward this team and this comic. Sometimes I see the lineup and something inside my head tells me that this isn't a team I'm especially interested in reading about. This happened when Brad Meltzer was on the book and it had Black Lightning, Vixen, and Red Arrow on the team. Sometimes I do read the stories and I realize that I would have been better off not reading them. That was how I felt about every JLA story from after Mark Waid's run all the way up to Infinite Crisis some 6 years later. Although I had read the entire League series from when Morrison started it to when it ended circa Infinite Crisis, I had not read nearly as much from the companion series JLA Classified. This series served to be a vehicle for rotating creative teams to tell their own standalone stories with the League. I had read a few of the classified arcs, like a return to the 1980s comedic JLI team by Keith Giffen, J.M. DeMatteis, and Mark McGuire. Likewise, I had read the Grant Morrison arc featuring the Ultramarines. I think the very nature of this series, being that there are no continuing story arcs and that each arc is self-contained, meant that I could easily pick and choose which arcs I should read and when I could stop reading the series. So while I didn't actively decide to stop reading this series after the Morrison arc and the comedic JLI arc, I also didn't feel like I was in much of a hurry to return for the following arcs. That brings us to my local library. Once again, the source of my reading comics I would not have otherwise read, like Fear itself and Superman and the Legion of Superheroes, and also the source of more than a few of my reviews for this channel. I saw JLA, That Was Now, This Is Then, written by Roger Stern and drawn by Stern's sometimes collaborator John Byrne. I was confused when I saw this because it looked like it came from the era in between Morrison's run in the late 90s and Infinite Crisis, but then I realized that this was part of JLA Classified, which explained why I had not read it. Specifically, this collects issues 50 through 54 of the JLA Classified series. I actually am not sure how much I really have to say about this book. John Byrne's art is solid as ever, although I do believe that his recent work has a grainier quality that you could not easily find in his work on Superman, X-Men, or Fantastic Four from the 1980s. I would suggest that if you prefer to see artists grow, evolve, and change as they keep going, then you might be disappointed with John Byrne's work in this book, and really anything he's done in the 2000s. Byrne seems to have hit some kind of glass ceiling where his aforementioned art in the 1980s is as good as it will ever get, and the only changes we will see is this grainy quality that I already mentioned. Roger Stern turns in a very solid story here, although it is really not an outstanding story either. I think it just hits that middle-of-the-road quality where nobody will complain about what's going on here, but nobody will really praise this either. It's just sort of there. So I guess it's apt that this appeared in a companion title that I don't know of anyone actually reading, because if this story had taken place in the main Justice League title, I'm not sure if this would have been okay. I see the JLA as being the best of the best, both in story and as a comic book. If a story is just okay, then it has no business being a Justice League story. That may be unfair of me to put these ridiculous notions on a JLA series, but I don't see this series as being a place where mediocrity should be tolerated. If the League is where the greatest heroes of Earth join forces to fight threats they cannot handle alone, then it should be a title where the greatest creators tell the greatest stories. That's really just my own personal taste, and I'm sure it is not shared by everyone. So how does that little diatribe relate to this story? Well, like I say, Stern turns in a mostly solid performance here as the writer, but it just doesn't quite feel, air quotes, top-notch, like what I feel a JLA story really should. If it wasn't for what I honestly would call a pretty creative way of telling this story in a non-linear fashion, this story is pretty standard, and I mean that in the worst way possible. The story doesn't really have any twists or turns at all. It doesn't feel inventive, and it doesn't really give us any character interactions that make me care about this team. These are some of the qualities that I would say are present in the JLA stories that I really do love. So what is this story? Well, at some point in the past, when the original JLA, not the actual original JLA from the Silver Age, but the retcon version of the JLA featured in JLA Year 1, was still a team, a god-type creature came to Earth and started destroying temples to various religions. We find out that he wants to get a rise out of the gods so that he can fight them, but they don't answer his challenge. I guess this is supposed to be a commentary on religion or something, but this doesn't exactly work because we know in the DC universe that multiple pantheons coexist, so there's no reason to believe that the Christian God or the Buddhist God or the Muslim God don't also coexist together. Although I guess you could say that they do exist in this world, and they just don't have any reason to go confront this god creature thing. Anyway, the Justice League plus Superman and Batman, both of whom are only occasional allies to the League at this point in time, they fight this guy and he teleports them to the moon for some unknown reason. They think that they kill him and then the story is over for those guys. Flash forward to what I guess is the present day, where we have a slightly different League. Instead of Black Canary, Green Arrow, Barry Allen, or Hal Jordan, we have Wonder Woman, the Atom, Wally West, and John Stewart. But this team is more or less the same team. There are just enough members of this team to not know what's going on when the fighting starts in the present day, and thus give the writer a reason to have the characters who do remember a reason to exposit. But wait, there really isn't a reason to exposit, because we are getting both of these stories simultaneously, sort of. The first issue is set entirely in the present day, when we know nothing about this villain. Then the second issue is set entirely in the past, and then the next few issues sort of jump back and forth, with the final issue of this arc literally doing a conclusion to both halves of this story, with the top panels from every page set in the past, and the bottom panels set in the present day. The point is, there really isn't a reason for Martian Manhunter to explain to Wally who this guy is, unless the creators needed to fill out some space in this 5-issue arc. Because like I said, this really is a pretty standard story when you ignore the way it was told. Now I guess Wally might be curious who this guy is, since he was just a kid when the League originally fought this guy. But does he actually need the Martian Manhunter to explain it to him now? All Wally actually needs to know is that this guy is a bad guy and is attacking the team. The only reason that the exposition is really given to us is to pad out the story. This book, I should mention, has one of the most misleading covers I've ever seen on a graphic novel or a comic book. As you can see, the cover depicts very odd versions of the JLA, where they are dressed up in ways that they have never dressed in air quotes reality. But that scene in this book, it takes up maybe 3 pages, if that. I thought that we were going to get something kinda similar to the Imaginary Stories storyline that Grant Morrison did very early in his run, with the imaginary versions of the League members meeting up with each other in their own minds. That is definitely kind of what this cover would have you believe, but nothing like this ever happened in the book. Instead, the bad guy tries to tempt the past version of the JLA by telling them that if they join him, he can make them better than what they are now. And so they each imagine what they would be like if he made them better. And I guess him making them better means that they would have the weird costumes. I think the real reason that they have the weird costumes is so that those costumes can be shown on the cover to entice people to buy this book. At least in the Silver Age, when we saw Superman being a jerkhole to Jimmy Olsen, and you were so intrigued that you bought the comic, at least that would actually happen in the comic. This is just there, and it isn't even a thing in the story. It feels forced, and it is very deceptive, and not in a good way. So anyway, the final issue of this arc ends in a really weird place, where after defeating this god creature, in the present and in the past, both teams start taking this time to talk about what they've learned. In the past, these guys talk about how, it was very tempting to take him up on his offer, but by golly, we are better than that, and that means we learned something today. This is the most clunky way of getting across the point that the characters in a book have gone through some kind of arc. I don't need the last 5 pages of an issue to explain what the arc was and that these characters went through it. In the present day, we get much of the same thing, with the present day League talking about how all of this could have been avoided the second time and that they'll know better next time. Really guys, are you planning on getting involved with a god-killing creature a second time? Again, this is just really clumsy in the way we are told what the arc was. This book, I'm actually surprised I had as much to say about it as I did. It's not that fantastic. I think I have more problems with it after talking about it for a little bit than I realized. But it's not really a bad story, it's just not very good either. It's definitely not good enough to have the JLA title on the cover. I don't think this is a book that many people are wondering if they should buy or read, but if you somehow are, I recommend you give this a skip. I think you could find some better JLA stories to buy if you're really looking to burn some money in your pocket. Like I said, this isn't that bad, but I just don't think I will really come away from this book having many positive things to say. Really, I don't even think I'll remember this book very much within a few months from now, which is almost worse, I would say. Anyway, I hope this video found you well, and if it did, I hope you guys share it, like it, comment, subscribe, do all those things that you do on videos. And until then, I'll see you guys tomorrow with some other kind of video. See you later.